Okay, so this is the second video in this series of establishing why exactly was uh, partition done. So far, if you have studied history as a student in any of the schools in Bharat, you must have been taught that it was indeed the two-nation theory that led to the partition or the vivification of our holy land. And to uh, as if that wasn't enough to burden the conscience of people or the conscience of the polytheists or the non-converted ones, we are also expected to carry this burden of the attribution of two nation theory, that is falsely and wrongly, if I may use that word, and sometimes even maliciously and deliberately put upon the shoulders of Savarkar and all those nationalist leaders. But that is completely false. Now, I don't know why we still stick to this idea that it was indeed Savarkar who brought forward the two nation theory, whereas in fact and in reality, there are evidences, documentary evidences available to prove that it was indeed Sayyid Ahmad Khan and people prior to him that had propagated this theory of two nation theory. But that is not the point. We are looking at this book right now. This book is Creating a New Medina. It was written by Venkat Dulipala. In the previous video, I set up the context for the academic study of this book. Why exactly was partition done? So, to give you a brief recap, partition was done to give Islam a state power, okay, a state or a nation state, wholly, solely, and specifically for Islam to rule. Now, why was this? My argument was because the Ottoman Turkey had fallen. To understand this, you must understand one story first of all. Right now, Christians and Muslims have been at loggerheads with each other ever since they have partitioned or divorced itself from the intellectual whole of Judaism. They have been fighting each other. There have been crusades, there have been wars that they have fought for each other's faith. But the point that you must keep in mind is they still do not agree on the point of God, whether the Jesus that is mentioned in the Quran or whether the Jesus that the Christians believe to be their savior, are both of them same or are both of them different. They both do not agree. But that is not the point, right? At the time of the end of World War I and then World War II, Christians had decisively overpowered the Muslims because the Muslims, I think their conquest, it stopped at Turkey. They could not make further inroads into what we today like to call as Europe and all those countries of Western Europe. However, their current immigration policies have made their lives very difficult. That is a separate topic to talk about altogether. But the point is, this friction, this competition, this frenzy between these two people of the book had resulted in Christians overpowering the Muslims. Now, Muslims, they have always desired that there has to be one nation state specifically dedicated or ruled based on the principles of Sharia, based on their principles. So there has to be a nation state created on the basis of Islam. Now, when Turkey fell, the Ottoman Caliphate fell because for them, people, Muslims, for them, Ottoman Caliphate was the manifestation of Islam as a nation state. But now that nation state had fallen. The Christians had successfully overpowered the Muslims. Now the Muslims, they desired that they must have one more geographical nation state, one physical entity for Islam to have a nation state. Now, obviously, the Christians, they were not going to grant them that geography within their own landscape. That is, if one Islamic caliphate had fallen, uh, those people, those fanatics, religious fundamentalists, they wanted one nation state all to themselves. Now, the Christians, they did not give it, obviously, they are not going to give them a nation state on their geography. Now, the timing of history was such that all these things, they precipitated into establishing a nation state for Islam during the time when the British were about to leave Bharat, that is during the time of 1945, 46, 47, so on and so forth. Now, this presented as an opportunity for the Muslims to set up a nation state of Islam. Now, this is a story. Now, I need evidence to back this story, right? That is something, if you are a student, if you are a Muslim, if you are sympathetic towards the cause of Islam, if you are watching this video, you would say, okay, that's a very good story, that's a very good point to make, but what are the evidences? That is why we have this book right now in front of us. It's a very good book. You should buy this book, you should purchase this book. Venkat Dulipala has done great service to this nation. All right, if you have not already read this book, and if you're a student of history, and if you want to learn about why exactly was partition done, I would recommend you read this book. But right now, let me present some evidences in front of you. I've already highlighted it. If you go to the first chapter, this is the index. If you go to the first chapter, let's see, I've already marked it here. This is chapter number 1, introduction, page number 4. Herein, Venkat Dulipala writes, my study argues, now I've highlighted the important bits in yellow, so you can see, my study argues that far from being a vague idea that accidentally became a nation state Pakistan. This is usually that is taught to us in school, that partition was accidental at the last moment. The Muslim League, they played hardball, and there was no other viable solution. This is what is sold to us in the name of history. Was popularly imagined in UP as a sovereign Islamic state, a new Medina, as it was called by some of its proponents. The new Medina, okay, New Medina was a state where Islam flourished. So Pakistan was envisaged, imagined to be a manifestation of that. In this regard, it was not just envisaged as a refuge for the Indian Muslims, but as an Islamic utopia that would be the harbinger for the renewal and the rise of Islam in the modern world. And for those of you who do not understand the importance of this word, the word modern represents anything that is after enlightenment, that is that Christian enlightenment. So modern world, now if you look at the words, rise of Islam in the modern world. So the Christians had decisively overpowered the Muslims in the era after enlightenment. Islam could not have a nation state to itself after the fall of Turkey and of the Ottoman Caliphate. This is what he's talking about. Act as a powerful new leader and protector of the entire Islamic world. So Pakistan, it was imagined and envisaged as a nation state based on Islam that would protect Islam all across this world. Thus emerge as a worthy successor to the defunct Turkish Caliphate and as the foremost Islamic power in the 20th century. So indeed, Pakistan was the replacement for the defunct, defeated, and secularized Ottoman Caliphate. So it was no random phenomenon. The Christians, after defeating the Muslims, they did not grant a nation state because they knew they could not have a nation state based on the principles of Islam. So where should they grant them? And very conveniently, they granted it on the holy land of Bharat, and we are seeing the results now. There is one more evidence. I know people out there will say that one evidence is not enough. I've underlined them or highlighted them in blue. As Pakistan became the focus of raucous debates in the public sphere, ML over here stands for Muslim League. Propagandists were not just keen to defend its economic, political, and military viability. Obviously, they had put out this idea that we would establish a separate nation state based on Islam, and they had to defend everything related to it, because one idea is not enough. You need people defending that idea. So these propagandists of the Muslim League, obviously they were defending it, but to portray Pakistan as a potentially and a far more powerful state than India is a misnomer, and indeed the largest and the most powerful Islamic state in the world, replacing Turkey. Okay, so that was the whole idea underneath, the geopolitical angle of partition that is usually hidden and usually not taught to us in the schools, because it exposes this idea that only a fraction of the majority of the Muslims, they could not bear a thought in mind about living with the polytheists, and hence, based on the two-nation theory, the partition was materialized. No, the fate of Bharat, the fate of the geography of Bharat was decided by the simple fact that the Turkish Ottoman Caliphate, it fell. Now Islam was without a nation state for itself, and now it was desperate and eagerly wanting to establish a nation states based on that, and based on the previous evidence, it would act as a renewal of Islam. Now, one more evidence in the same chapter here, I've also marked it in pink. But while this theory was frequently invoked in UP, what was emphasized above all as Pakistan's strength as a potential first class power surpassing Turkey, thus enabling it to extend its protective umbrella not only over Muslims in India, Hindu India, but over the Islamic world at large in a setting dominated by Western powers. Okay, so they are still stuck in that time frame between First World War and the Second World War, when the Ottoman Turkey fell and they needed a nation state for itself, and hence Pakistan materialized. So this is the evidence for the geopolitical angle of partitioning Pakistan. British could have simply just left without partition. Okay, all the violence that was perpetrated by the Muslim League and its henchmen, pertaining to the direct day violence and the violence of the partition. Okay, it was rooted in this ideology that after the fall of Islamic Caliphate in Ottoman, Islam needed a state power, and that was how Pakistan was manifested and materialized, and finally it was brought into reality.